And now I would like to introduce our first plenary discussion. I have to say that Dean Jack Knott was the first person who mentioned the idea of grand challenges to me, and I distinctly remember the conversation at my very first ASPA conference, which was about 2 months after I'd taken the job here at the Academy. I didn't really know what to make of it at that time, but Jack did not drop the hint just once. He's continued to have the conversation, and we've shaped some of these ideas, and Jack served on our steering committee, and the University of Southern California Saul Price School of Public Administration has generously sponsored this session. So I am pleased and thrilled to invite Jack to the stage now to moderate our first plenary discussion. Then and now, the origins of the field of public administration and its current grand challenges. Jack, thank you.
Thank you so much, Terry. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. It's really great to be here. I'm very thankful to Terry, the steering committee, and all of you who've worked so hard to develop these grand challenges. I think it's really one of the most exciting things that the Academy has done for a long time and is so timely and important. So congratulations, Terry, and everyone who's worked on this. I want to introduce our panelists. I'm going to come back to that in just a few minutes. I wanted to say just a few introductory remarks, but the panelists are going to represent different areas of the grand challenges. And so they will represent their different fields, but I want to start with just a few introductory remarks. I'd like to speak briefly about the field of public administration, the progressive year, and how that history informs our approach to grand challenges today. As many of you know, I strongly believe that we are in an historical era comparable to the progressive reform era at the turn of the 19th, 20th centuries. The issues are very similar. Rapid technological change, large-scale immigration, great inequality of income, degradation of the environment, extreme polarization and gridlock, and a growing concern about our democracy. In their new book, Renovating Democracy, which I finally read the last couple of weeks, by Nicholas Berggruen and Nathan Gardels, they write, today, heading toward the midpoint of the 21st century, America is facing a crisis of governance not dissimilar to that of the turn of the 20th century. And they are grappling with that whole issue. They refer, in fact, to a third turn of democracy, seeing the founding era and the progressive era as the first and second turns. And now we're in a third turn. And so that's why I think this grand challenge is so timely. And they are proposing several institutional design changes at the state and local levels, which are also the way progressive reform happened. It started at the local state level, percolated up to the national level. You know, in the 19th century, it was the first industrial revolution. We're now in the fourth digital industrial revolution, which is just as dramatic and is having similar kinds of effects. And I believe that the grand challenges can serve as a template for how we at NAPA collectively can address these significant issues. Much like the New York Bureau of Municipal Research, which was a leading think tank activist group back then, NAPA and its fellows and affiliated schools and other institutions, affiliated institutions, can play major roles in thought leadership, convening, advising, and taking action. See us playing that role. It was also a time when all of the types of regulatory agencies that we know now were established. And it was also the time when most of the professional associations were set up during that progressive era, including the schools of public affairs. As you may know, the progressive movement fostered the creation of the Kennedy School, what is now the Kennedy School, the Maxwell School, and the Price School of Public Policy, which is now the Price School. We all were started at the aftermath, just following the progressive era, and we were the first schools in the country to offer the MPA degree and an undergraduate concentration in public administration. So this whole field and its professionalization came out of that movement. And so now is a chance to connect to that and do a similar kind of thing with the fields of public policy and administration today. You might note that both Maxwell and Price in their original titles included the word citizenship. Maxwell still has the word citizenship in it because it was not just about government, it was about government and citizens and citizen engagement. And that's part of what we're about here too. But that era of reform had at least two major flaws that we do not want to replicate. One of those was it was very exclusive. The progressive era, as you may know, was also the era of Jim Crow laws. It was the era in which blacks were totally disfranchised from voting, where the Ku Klux Klan and other terrorist organizations gained huge influence in the South and elsewhere. And if we're going to grab hold of this in the fourth industrial revolution in the age today, we need to be inclusive and we need to be diverse, and that needs to be at the heart of what we're doing. Second, it didn't really grapple with the issue of inequality. It led in the 1920s to what is known as the Gilded Age, right? And that's been, movies and books written about that. That's not the result that we want here. We need to grapple with these social, economic inequality issues that are driving the populism of today and the kind of issues our country faces. So with that as a backdrop, there are really four broad categories. There's managing technical change, ensuring sustainability, to protecting and advancing democracy, including administration, and strengthening social and economic development. And I believe, as an academic, I'm talking from that point of view, these four thematic challenges should help and really drive the curriculum that we have at our schools, and it should help shape the research agendas that we have at our schools. And I think it's a very real, important framework for doing this, and that's what I'm going to be advocating for. Now, I want to give you a couple examples of why that's really possible. If you take managing technology, for example, just in our school, and I know Christian is going to talk a lot more about this, but we've created a data science and policy analysis joint degree with engineering. We've created a health analytics lab. We've created a data center, what we call the data core, and so forth. This is becoming essential for the training in this field. In ensuring environmental sustainability, this is something that needs to be built into every program. At USC, we're now requiring students to take sustainability as part of their curriculum because you can't manage if you don't manage in a sustainable way. Third, around democracy and administration, advancing it, we need to be much more international and global. We're going to hear more about that in a bit. But we also need to rethink public finance and financial management and public-private financing of infrastructure, investment, and services. We need to rethink how we do regulation. Regulation, all the regulatory agencies were set up in very bureaucratic ways during the progressive era, and they still operate the same way, and they can't keep up with the kind of rapid technology change that we have now. In social and economic development, we just received a gift for promoting sustainable communities, but broadly defined to include intergenerational, diverse communities, as well as the income level differences, because sustainability includes all of those things. And so we're going to be having what we call disruptive conversations about that. And I also want to just close by saying we need to rethink, in some ways, how our schools operate. We need especially external partnerships, maybe along the idea of the Wisconsin model during the progressive era, in which we actually partner with local and state governments or with the national government in solving problems. That was kind of what the Wisconsin model was at that time. At our school, for example, we have a partnership with Brookings around health care and health policy. We also are participating with several other schools in the Volcker Alliance GTU, Government to You process. But working with these stakeholders needs to be part of what we do as a school. Second, I think our schools need to be larger and more impactful. There are too many of our schools that are just small or parts of political science. They need to be bigger, and they need to graduate more students, and they need to have a bigger impact on public administration and public policy. And that's why I've been a really big advocate for undergraduate education in public policy and public administration as a pipeline in creating scale and getting people into public service early on. We used to have a degree at Price called the intergovernmental degree. You'd spend part of your time in Washington, part of your time in Sacramento, part of your time in LA. And that concept is very important for this because almost all these issues are intergovernmental. And then finally, I just want to say we need to have continuous experiential learning through practicums and internships throughout that education process. So these are just little glimpses at how I think the grand challenges are going to shape our education enterprise over the next period of time, both in terms of research and in terms of education, and I've given a few examples of that. And now what we'd like to do is go into depth more in some of these specific areas, and I'd like to introduce our panelists, who we're gonna, we can't cover all of this because we're only 3 people, plus me. So I'd first like to introduce Shavonda Jacobs-Young. She's the administrator of the Agricultural Research Service and acting chief scientist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Shavonda, welcome. She's going to speak to us about sustainability. Ramaya Krishnan, Dean of the Heinz College of Information Systems and Public Policy and the William W. and Ruth F. Cooper Professor of Management Science and Information Systems at Carnegie Mellon University, will talk to us about managing technology. And Cedric Sims, Senior Vice President of Justice, Homeland Security, and Transportation at Booz Allen Hamilton, will talk about protecting and advancing democracy. So please welcome our panelists. So, Shavonda, I'm going to start with you, and we have about 7 minutes. So they only gave us a short period of time for this, so we got to be succinct because we want to leave a little bit of time for questions, comments.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for including me on the panel. The grand challenges, wow. So I'm in the field of agriculture. I am the head of the Agricultural Research Service, so I take a perspective of this from a federal scientist sort of bird's eye view. And the grand challenges, no matter which ones we're talking about on that list, we want to be able to promote evidence-based, data-based, science-based decision-making going forward and how we address many of the challenges we face. In agriculture, we have the big challenge of expecting a growing population of about 10 billion people by 2050. For context, today we have about 7 billion people on the planet. All of those people will need to eat. And we have to be able to produce food in an environmentally sustainable way. In the context of climate change, extreme weather patterns, and the many pests and diseases that we face every day. So in order for us as scientists, I have about 2,000 PhD scientists in the ARS. In order for us to meet that challenge, we have to be able to use all the tools at our disposal. And right now, we need society's trust. We need to build public trust in the use of science. Pew Research, partner with AAAS, the General Social Survey, which I'm told many of you will be very familiar with, they already tell us that there is a huge divide between perspectives from society and from scientists. For example, 88% of scientists believe it's safe to eat genetically modified foods. What do you think the society feels? Just any guess. 12. No, it's 37%. Thankfully, it's a little better than 12. Not much, but it's a little bit better. So how do we engage in productive dialogue with society to improve the public trust? And how do we raise scientific literacy, a fundamental understanding about how science works? We're in competition with social media and all of the philosophers on Facebook, and so we have a huge job ahead of us as scientists to help meet that challenge. So I think as public administrators that we have a huge role in helping to move the needle forward. Norman Borlaug, anybody ever heard of Norman Borlaug? So just like Jack talked about history repeating itself, here we find ourselves again needing to feed a lot of people. Norman Borlaug, the father of the Green Revolution, Nobel Prize winner, is credited with feeding 1 billion people. And he came along with science and innovation just at the right time. We need to be able to implement innovative techniques to feed the world. In the US, we have an abundant food supply. It's diverse, it's healthy, it's nutritious, it's relatively cheap if you look around the world. All of that is possible because of science and innovation. And we don't want to stop where we are today. We need to keep pushing the envelope. And so we need to be able to have lots of folks in on that conversation. And so my second point is that these are all complicated. And no one of our organizations, institution types can do it alone. We all have to work together. And so I believe as public administrators, we can create that space where we bring lots of disciplines and lots of organization types together to address issues like climate change. For example, in USDA, we've created 10 climate hubs across the country. USDA has been and will continue to be one of the best researchers on climate change. However, peer-reviewed publications don't help a farmer standing in the middle of a field. And so we created the climate hubs to take all of that information to translate the tools that producers can use, producers and others can use. But it didn't take a bench scientist to do that. We had to bring together all types of scientists, plant breeders, animal breeders, most importantly, social scientists, to help us better communicate this information. And so we need to create those spaces where we bring together these multidisciplinary, multi-organizational types. We need public and private working together. And then last, I like to say, once we create that space, we've got to let people fly. We've got to create an innovation ecosystem where we allow people to take risk, where we push the envelope. We cannot meet those challenges by playing it safe. I'm from the federal government, and I'll be the first to admit that we have a lot of bureaucracy. And how do we create an innovative ecosystem that encourages people to push the envelope, perhaps come up with that game-changing technology? We just announced a new initiative in Napa on Monday. I have a staff out in Beltsville, Maryland, about 20 miles from here, that creates the national program for the entire country for our organization. That stovepipe organization structure was created in the 80s. And Roger Kodat and his team came out, and we're telling everybody, take an open approach. I've tried to create an innovation ecosystem by creating things like ARSX and grand challenges, and I'm sorry, no disrespect. The Innovation Fund. And what I want to know is, how do we take our $1.6 billion worth of program and integrate that into our DNA, just who we are? That we're not creating it as a bubble, but we are all about innovation and game-changing solutions. And so thank you for the opportunity to be here to talk with this panel.
Thank you. That was excellent. Thank you very much. Is Norman Borlaug, was he a government scientist, or was he?
He was a NGO. So he worked for a non-governmental organization. He's a wheat breeder. A wheat breeder changed the world.
Wow, okay. Well, that point about the importance of science and data and recognize that is huge. Christian is going to talk to us about managing technology. He's a clear leader of that in academia and in the country, and so is his school. So I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Jack. Good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be on this panel. So I want to take the perspective of, how do you take a grand challenge and actually make it executable? How do you actually act on it? And in particular, I'm going to pick up on what Jack was talking about the fourth industrial revolution, and what the implications are, in particular related to making government AI ready. So oftentimes one thinks about the fourth IR as something that is going to happen in the future. How many of you actually speak to your devices? And I don't mean like mumbling around, but talking to your phones, or you talk to Alexa or things of that nature. In other words, so the technology is here, right? So this is not going to be a phase change. It's something that is going to make its way into our everyday lives. I mean, so if you look at what it is that's happening today, and all of this has happened in a relatively compressed period of time. The iPhone was introduced in 2007, so it's not like it was a long time ago. So in just over a decade, we've gone from a world where mobile devices didn't exist to where these platforms are now ubiquitous. Every one of us is tethered to them. And the kind of service expectations that have been established by services like Uber, like Amazon, fundamentally color the way in which citizens expect services from government, right? So let's park that idea, the first idea there. The second has to do with, you've probably been reading a lot of reports. There's a McKinsey study that just came out a little, or a few months ago that talks about the fact that 6 out of 10 occupations, 30% of the tasks associated with those occupations are likely going to be affected by AI. This has to do with the potential change in the nature of work itself and what the implications thereof are for the need to reskill and upskill the workforce. And clearly, that's a really important aspect for public administration. It has important implications for government as a whole. You've also probably read about the billion-dollar investments from Accenture, from AT&T, from Amazon in upskilling their workforce. So what exactly is going on here, and how might one unpack this question of reskilling and upskilling? I want to say a few words about that. And then this issue of inequality that Jack spoke about. So David Autor, who's a well-known economist at Harvard, has been chronicling what he calls economic polarization, which has to do with what he calls a hollowing out of the middle. This is skill-biased changes in the nature of work, where there's growth in low-skill jobs and high-skill jobs, but the middle-skill jobs are being hollowed out. And that then increases inequality because people with high-skill jobs have high wages, people with low-skill jobs don't have high wages, but that's where the growth is occurring. The middle-skill jobs are disappearing. And so that's a broader issue that one needs to think about. So with that as context, let me just sort of dive into 2 points, one relating to how to think about the nature of work, the future of work, and how one upskills, reskills, etc. So the first point is that you could think about jobs not as an aggregate entity, but really as a bundle of tasks. So this is work that a colleague of mine, Tom Mitchell, published in Science just over a year ago, where if you think of a job as consisting of tasks, technology is going to affect and make changes at the level of a task. So every one of these jobs that we have, so if you think of going on a freeway or entering the turnpike, the Pennsylvania Turnpike, there are 3 tasks that you encounter, right? You pick up a ticket, and when you exit the turnpike, you hand in the ticket, you pay for it. Now, each of those tasks are automatable. And if they are, then the job of somebody who just hands out the ticket and collects the cost of traversing the turnpike, that job disappears. But on the other hand, if you have a job that has a variety of tasks, only with some subset of those tasks are going to be augmented or automated, then you're going to see a change in the set of skills required to actually perform the job. And that's the question. So the first question is, can we predict which set of skills, what sets of tasks are going to be changed, and how might we then identify the skill sets individuals have to acquire to perform the new sets of jobs that are going to emerge in the future, and then how might we provide that training to individuals. And here I think NAPA, the schools of public policy, have an important role to play by identifying what the nature of this reskilling, retraining challenge is going to be. We've been doing this work at Carnegie Mellon both with state and local governments by working with them to identify particular sets of particular agencies that we've been working with and identifying ways in which we can help them improve the sets of skills that they need. We are also partnering with Volcker that Jack spoke about, and more recently a Ford Foundation, Hewlett and New America Foundation initiative called the Public Interest Technology Initiative. It's called the PIT-UN network, which is attempting to build greater human capital in the agencies to have these right sets of skills to perform this type of work. So I think the important point here is the capability to think through how work is changing is important, but equally important are partnerships to actually enable this change to happen. The last point I want to make is that we've been talking a lot about how people work effectively in diverse teams, but increasingly we need to think about how humans will work effectively with AIs. So we're beginning to see this already where people are employing and using technology. So for instance, we're working with the Allegheny County Department of Human Services where caseworkers have to make decisions about child abuse calls that come in and decide which calls to pursue and which calls not to pursue. And that recommendation of which calls to pursue and not to pursue is actually done by an AI. And the caseworker has to decide if she's going to trust the AI to and follow the recommendation of the AI. So there's issue of trust and transparency in the deployment of AI in the public interest, and how that will permit the teaming of humans and AI is as important as giving people the right sets of skills to perform the work that they need to do. So two important points to translate the grand challenge of making government AI ready. One is how do we get the workforce with the right sets of skills? And the second is working out the trust and transparency problems to ensure that humans and AIs can work effectively together in the public interest. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Christian. That's very helpful, and especially in terms of thinking about just jobs aren't always going to be eliminated, right? Mm-hmm. They may be transformed in ways, and that's how we need to think about it. Cedric is going to talk to us about advancing and protecting democracy. So
Indeed.
Thank you for being here.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you to the Academy, to all those who are on the nominating committee, and those of you that participated in voting. It's an honor to sit here before you today and see a lot of familiar faces. I think one of the things I got out of your talk there is that the toll workers need to be reskilled to be coders because the interface for EasyPass is terrible. So there are a couple people that are in this audience that I want to recognize real quickly before I get into my comments that quite frankly have created a platform for me to be here today with you. One of them that I want to recognize is Margie Graves, who she's a phenomenal technology leader, has endured a lot, working through some very complex issues across the Department of Homeland Security, and is continuing to serve our government in some very key roles. She coaxed me out of the Secret Service. She's one of the only people that could have done that. So Margie, thank you very much for your service, and thank you for the opportunity to be here before you today. I also want to recognize one of our national treasures that's in this room. And that gentleman is Thad Allen. I know all of you know who Thad is. I have the pleasure to serve with Thad at Booz Allen Hamilton. And so Thad, if you're still in the room, I can't see because the column's in front of me, thank you again for continuing to serve your nation and contribute to our nation's welfare. I used to often share this thought. A lot of efforts often end the way that they begin. And I think it's very important to understand that precept and its impact in this discussion about the grand challenges. At the Department of Homeland Security, I had the responsibility for about 505 programs of record, about $18 billion worth of our appropriated spend. And for our programs that were not doing well, you could almost immediately trace that back to a rocky start. And for the few programs that were running well, you could also trace that back to a right start. Strong analysis of alternatives, strong requirements, and most importantly, a project manager that really knew how to mitigate and monitor risk across the program. And so this concept about grand challenges is very critical. Even the fact that we use the word grand is a statement of how we want to start this. Grand is preeminent. Grand is magnificent. Grand is also imposing. We have a great opportunity with these challenges to really tackle some very, very complex and difficult issues, but also with an impact and outcome that will really move our nation forward. And that's why I think that even just calling them grand challenges is a phenomenal moment on behalf of NAPA to actually define these the right way. One of the things I want to cover is this discussion around protecting and advancing democracy as a grand challenge. And then specifically, I'd like to focus on the electoral security aspect. Within the Department of Homeland Security is a fairly newly reformed or reimagined organization called CISA. It's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And CISA is charged, amongst many different roles, to support the protection of our electoral system. Now, amongst that, they provide a number of services: cybersecurity assessments, detection and prevention, information awareness, and training. And these are all free services that are provided to all levels of government to make sure that our electoral process is secured in this next cycle. All of our citizens have an expectation that we will have free, open, and fair elections. We also have an expectation that, quite frankly, if there are adversaries that are coming after our electoral systems, that our federal government will do its part to protect. Although we know that it is not our federal government alone that's responsible for these systems. Yet it is our responsibility still to provide the necessary protections to make sure we have free and open elections. So to that end, we have to recognize the signals, we have to amplify the signals. We have to know when threats are coming at us, we need to know where those threats are coming from, we need to know who they are. But in order to do that, we have to first start with a concept that you mentioned earlier, Chana, is that we have to build trust. We have to build empowerment. We have to build the relationships ahead of time so that when those threats come after us, we have the opportunity to address those challenges in unison, not separately. So to that end, NAPA is in a very, very unique position to bridge between multiple levels of government, between state, federal, local, tribal, all across our levels of government, to make sure that because adversaries will come at us, we don't know who they are. They may be nation states. They could be loosely affiliated organizations. They could be dynamics that we can't immediately identify, but we must prevent and protect against those. And NAPA is in a very unique position to provide those protections that are necessary. So to that end, I think ahead of time, all those that will contribute to the panel related to protecting our national security, and I hope that we'll all do our part to protect 2020. Thank you.
Thank you. Really pleased that you picked up on this notion of trust, because that seems the theme across this, and especially the trust to the citizenry, right? That people value science, they value what the technology is doing. So how much time do we have, Terry? 20 minutes, okay. So, all right, wow, you guys were better than I thought. Thank you very much.
We listened.
I'm also glad I didn't wear my normal really bright socks sitting up here. I think this ought to be a conversation, and so unless you have questions for each other, I'd like to open it up to the audience.
I actually have a question real quickly regarding AI, if I can. So, and I want to be very, very clear. My heart, my soul is always with public service. So this is not an advertisement for Booz Allen Hamilton, okay? But we do have a fairly strong set of practices in AI. And one of the things that we find is a fairly unique area and challenge is with this whole issue of adversarial AI. We often talk about AI for the good. There's a lot that's out there, a lot of AI for the bad. In fact, I think there's some recent communication, maybe some directives around deep fakes and other sorts of utilization of AI. And again, it has a connection with the whole concern about our election security and potentially poor information being put out there. So what are your thoughts around that space?
That's a great question. So I don't know how many of you know what deep fakes are. So deep fakes are through regenerative neural networks, you can recreate video from existing content to make it look and sound like somebody is saying things that they did not say, but it's really hard for us to, it goes to this core issue of trust again. So when you have content that looks like a leader or somebody who's contending for an election is making certain remarks, but they were actually doctored in some ways. And it's really adversarial in the following sense that, and it's tied in with a broader issue. How can you identify content that's misinformation and disinformation? I think we have David Lazar here, who's a Napa fellow, who's an expert on this topic as well. And this broader context of what we call social cybersecurity at Carnegie Mellon, which is traditionally one thinks about cybersecurity in the context of exploiting vulnerabilities. When a human wants to exploit vulnerabilities in a computing system, be it an electoral system or otherwise, that's an example of traditional information security. But when you have a human wanting to exploit the vulnerability in other humans, that's social cybersecurity. And that's an example of where you have content of the sort that you just mentioned, where you have deepfakes, or you have other kinds of content that might be misinformation and disinformation, which gets further sort of exacerbated by the filter bubbles that social networks enable by having people just connected to others who just think and read just the news that they think is appropriate, and therefore they never hear from any other source. So that all results in this unfortunate combination of trends that results in the kinds of wedges that form and the extreme polarization that forms. Now that's the problem. Now the question is, how good is the technology to identify deep fakes? We are actually, there's work ongoing at multiple universities, including CMU, that's getting better at identifying deep fakes. And I think that there is that kind of AI. The other kind of AI is, how do we build AIs that are robust to manipulation? That is, if I make changes in some of the content, can that be discovered? You know, you've seen the classic example of an AI that identifies a dog as a dog on the internet. I mean, it used to be the old maxim was nobody knew if you were a dog on the internet. Now, actually, you can know if you're a dog on the internet. But if you change a few pixels, the classifier thinks a dog is a cat, let's say. So there's new technology that tries to actually make it more robust to adversarial manipulation. So there are two things. One is this whole issue of misinformation, disinformation, and the viral propagation of it, and how might we protect ourselves against that. And that's social cybersecurity. And I think that's a big, big challenge. And the other piece is, how do we build technology that's more robust to adversarial manipulation? So both of these are relevant points.
Great. Very good. Okay, so do we have a microphone, or can people speak up? Let's, any comments or questions from the group? Yes. Yes. Your microphone is on its way. And would you say who you are and...
Yeah, my name is Peter Winokur. I used to head a very small government agency. And I have a question for Ms. Young, chief scientist. You had 2,000 PhDs working for you, very impressive. And I want to know how you work with those scientists and navigate a world in which the administration, it could be this administration, it could be a future administration, isn't fully supportive of evidence-based approaches. An administration that might say, hey, we can use that pesticide, even though your scientists may say it wouldn't be in the public interest. How do you work with those scientists to maintain their focus, their morale? And like I said, it could be this administration, it could be a future one.
So thank you for your question. So as a civil servant, I'm a civil servant, senior executive service member. I've been in the SES about 10 years, so I've had an experience with a number of leadership changes in different administrations. Through all of them, it's been important to be very clear about scientific integrity. I've had the fortune of being able to help develop the scientific integrity policy for the Department of Agriculture. And we use scientific integrity differently in different avenues. In government, we use scientific integrity to mean that the science is unadulterated. It is not impacted by political influence. And so it means a lot of other things. Our scientists can serve in leadership positions in scientific organizations. They can communicate their science. So for me, staying very clear about what the principles are about the integrity of our science has been relatively easy for me. The biggest job I have is building and maintaining trust with our scientific workforce that nothing has changed, because there is a lot of influence from media and other places. I will tell you, as the acting chief scientist for USDA, as the head of the Intramural Research Agency, that we are conducting business as usual. Now, the second part of that question, when we provide scientific data and information, it's only one piece of information that's used by policy decision makers. And so they have other variables that they use. It's my job to ensure that we provide the highest quality data and evidence that we can, so that they can feed into their decisions. However, we are never in a position to force anyone to use that information. And so we provide data to FDA, to CDC, to agencies across USDA, the Food Safety Inspection Service, Animal Plant Health Inspection Service. So our data underlies a lot of those decisions, but it's not the only factor that's used in those decisions.
Is there anything that you are doing in that science that is politically conflictual in some way?
All the time.
What would be an example that might be conflictual, say, with the politics, but you're still able to?
Well, so I'm so glad you're sitting in the middle. So artificial, because
politics as well.
No, not because of political reasons, but because of the intersection between technology and all of these. So, for example, USDA has been doing climate research for probably 100 years. I mean, we have lots and lots of data. We have lots and lots of peer-reviewed publications out there that's impacting, the decisions around climate change and the response. Now, getting the data used to be the big impact. Now we have more data than we know what to do with. We have watersheds where we have 100 years worth of data. And now we're partnering with the Microsofts and the other organizations that have the technologies that we need to be able to come in and take that data that wasn't developed to talk to one another, it's not interoperable, and help us layer that machine learning, because we had to take baby steps. And now we have just announced a big partnership with Microsoft where we're going out and we're censoring farms. In this case, our research farms. We have about 7,000 acres, about 20 miles from here. If you get a chance, go to Beltsville. And that farm is instrumented. And so whatever that data says is what will be reported, regardless of how it is perceived by any one side or the other. The data is what the data is. And so regardless of whether it's a politically sensitive topic or not, we report the facts. And yes, we work with the leadership because they need to have a heads up. There should be a no surprise rule in every organization. And so we might need to be able to give them an opportunity to communicate, develop their communication plan, but the data is the data. And that's a part of the scientific integrity policy. The data is the data.
I'm actually encouraged and pleased to hear that.
So have I built your public trust?
You already had my public trust.
Jack, if I might make a comment what Ms. Young said. I think
It's Dr. Jacobs Young.
Dr. Jacobs Young said. Thank you. So that this point about using data at scale from agriculture is a great connection between making government AI ready on the one hand and sustainability and resilience. I mean, so these grand challenges are not siloed, they're connected.
That's a good point.
So I thought it would be a great point that you made.
That's why it's good that you're in the middle.
That's right. Okay. We have a question way in the back. Laura?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Laura Bloomberg. I'm the dean at the Humphrey School. And first, just quickly, I have to say, when you mentioned Norman Borlaug, I lit up because I know him well. He passed away about 10 years ago, and he did his doctoral work at the University of Minnesota.
Yes.
So, but this comment
That's
just
why
now.
he's so brilliant. I understand.
What I understand about reading the literature about the nature of grand challenges themselves is just what one of the panelists just said about they're not siloed. They defy single sector approaches or single disciplinary approaches. So my question is, what is it that we can be doing to create opportunities for people mid-career to be thinking about professional development or additional training so that we all understand that our disciplinary focus or our sectoral focus or our departmental focus is important, but so too is our ability to work across those. So Jack, you talked about local, state, federal government experiences for students. What about across agencies within a particular governmental level?
Can I sure. So Laura, these are my questions. I can't see you here because we have a, there you are. So I think this is an excellent question. I think there are two parts to it. One is, what is the right type of education or training that you would like to provide? Which elements of these are sort of quote unquote horizontal that would apply to everybody, and which of these are specific to individual executives based on the role that they're playing, the agencies that they're in. So we've just begun an engagement with the FEI, the Federal Executive Institute, where they've approached us about training with regard to these fourth IR type of topics that I've just spoken about. The U.S. Army has a similar question, and the DoD more broadly has a similar challenge. So I think there's one question is the nature of the training and what is appropriate and how might we best help. That's one. The second is, how is it going to be paid for? Is the individual going to pay for it? Is the agency going to pay for it? This goes to my earlier remark about the fact that in the private sector you're beginning to see these large-scale investments by the Accentures, by the Amazons of the world in reskilling and upskilling the workforce. What's the equivalent of that in government? There's a bill in Congress that Congresswoman Del Bene has, but it's called the Lifelong Learning Benefits Bill. And that bill is really about, it's not focused per se on government executives or workers. It's focused on citizens, and it talks about creating the equivalent of an education savings account, like a health savings account, an education savings account, that if you're employed, a third of it would come from the individual, a third of it from government, a third from the employer. And that then becomes up to $10,000, which you could then use towards your own upskilling and reskilling. The question of how might something specific be focused on providing public sector agencies with the resources to invest in their own workforce is still an open question.
One corollary to that, and I'll add this. The length of time that it takes to receive that training is also going to matter too. I mean, the velocity and the degree of change is happening so quickly that even though we recognize that our teams need to be cross-skilled, especially mid-career, things on that order, you don't always have the luxury of pulling somebody out of the fight for 6 months to go through some rigorous, certificate program. There are times when you need to be able to have a little bit more of the on-demand, so at the moment, while they're performing their duties, they can have that ability to have some basic kind of just-in-time skilling that will actually link with the job that they have. Make them conversant, make them aware. They may not have to be the subject matter expert, but they need to at least be able to function in that broadening environment. So I think there's an aspect too in terms of the skilling is how fast can that happen? How quickly can we get the learning to the individual that needs it and actually have an impact on their thinking, their approaches? Yeah,
that's a very important point, and similar to what one of the things I was going to say. We do, it's executive education or continuous education. Say, for example, we have a nice contract with the County of Los Angeles. It brings agency people from different agencies together around problems. And they often haven't interacted in the way in their normal jobs, the way they do in these. And these are short courses, right? That they're not quitting their jobs and coming and getting a degree. And that kind of thing, I think, is hugely important for this. Secondly, I strongly believe that our schools ought to be interdisciplinary. I think like Minnesota has urban planning as well as public administration, public policy in the school. And I'm always urging our public administration students to take some courses on land use, housing, infrastructure, transportation, because when they become city managers or the other public roles, those are the kind of issues they're going to be dealing with. And often we're trained in silos and we don't even know anything about transportation or land use, and yet we're going to be managing those kinds of things. So those are two maybe additional points. Yes, right here.
So I'm Jennifer Hughes. I'm actually staff to Napa, but I'm a fellow, and I was with Montgomery County, Maryland for most of my career.
Can everybody hear?
Well, the mic's coming.
We got to wait for the mic.
Thank you. So my
Just say your name.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jennifer Hughes. I was with Montgomery County, Maryland for a while. My last position there was as the OMB director for the county. So my question actually builds on something that Mr. Sims said. We have government processes that are very structured, that are often delineated in laws. For example, our procurement systems, our HR systems, our budgeting processes, et cetera. The rigidity of those systems often conflict with the need for agility. And so until you deal with those systems, which again are often defined in laws, how do you build agility and nimbleness into the systems that are required to deal with the issues that you're speaking?
And if I could piggyback on that, a lot of public areas reflect multiple values that have been accumulated over time in the James Q. Wilson sense. And so it's not like, making Coke where you just have one thing. You're also trying to worry about the environment, you're worried about inequality, you're worried about diversity. You have a whole set of other values built into these laws that you have to pay attention to, that is really on top of the kinds of things that you're saying.
Well, I'll just try to touch on it briefly because I'm sure all of my panelists have a thought on this. And the unfortunate reality is that those values that are baked into our laws, perhaps by design, aren't changeable by the wind, okay? But we also know that over time, those values have had to mature and come in alignment with our societal perspectives. You talk about the D&I-related challenges that we've had, our laws not reflecting those. We still have states where there are significant challenges to the LGBTQ community and things on that order. So the laws will take time to get where our society stands on these matters now. But I'll share with you that I think it's probably something you have experienced in your prior career, and it's something that I think that we did through a lot of the imperfections that we're dealing with at the Department of Homeland Security. It's all initially about how your leadership overcome that, in the performance of your daily duties. I have the pleasure, as I look out across the audience, to see the former Deputy CIO of the Department of Homeland Security, the current Chief Human Capital Officer, Angela Bailey of the Department of Homeland Security, the former Chief Administrative Officer of the Department of Homeland Security, and there are probably others that are in here. And I tell you, there was a very robust partnership. Peggy Sherry's probably here too, was a former Chief Financial Officer. I don't know if she's here this morning, but there's a very robust partnership that you have to build in that community of leaders and operate and function not independent of the law, certainly within the context of the law, but maximizing every flexibility that you can within the law to find out where those enablers are, not the restrictions. And obviously you need to have strong counsel that'll support you on that too. So to that end, I think that you have to do it through actions and behavior until the law catches up, because it is just not designed to move at the pace of our society.
Anybody else want to add anything to that?
I agree. One of the things, my PhD's in paper science and engineering. I'm an engineer, and I'm head of an agricultural research organization. I know, go figure. But the part about continuous process improvement is something that I think is applicable no matter where you are. And so I'm in an agency that carries the original mission of the USDA. And so as you can imagine, over 150 so years, there are a lot of cultures and strongly held beliefs in the system. Coming in as a new person, I challenged everything. What is the law? What is a requirement? And what is just us? And if it's just us, can't we do something about it? And so it has been 6 years of finally seeing that everybody's gotten on board in terms of really, when I say, if we can do it better, I'm open to doing it that way. Using things like robotics to fill out forms. So we have an individual who sits at a desk and puts the same information in 3 forms. So now we are using robotics. We're using machine learning to be able to do that. And so then what do we do with that individual when that time is freed up? We got lots of stuff we can do with that individual. And so having a culture where people are open to pushing the envelope, and it's okay, is where I've kind of laid my bedrock.
I think we have time for one more question back there, the gentleman. Where we have a
Of course, you would call on Alan Balutis, so anyway, so here we go.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sills.
Yeah. Oh, your mic's not on, sir.
I missed that. Here, right in front.
There we go.
It is. Alan Balutis, I chair the standing panel on the public service for the Academy. Thank you all for your insights this morning. You started this session talking about similar movements in the past and the academic roots, but it seems to me that some of the success of that was due to the fact that they were able to find like-minded individuals in the media at that time, authors, columnists, editors who helped spread that word and to the general population, and that provided a foundation for a number of major political figures that we point to today who made their whole platform reforming government and improving government. As you look at the landscape today, are there people, any of the members of the panel would point to, either in our media or federal, state, local government, that they see as leaders, advocates, potential allies, catalysts to help some of these reforms come to fruition?
Very, very good question. I'm going to cheat a little bit here. There's a question over here also that would you give your question as well? And just so that we can get both of these in.
No, I'm Margie Graves. I'm the director of the Biden School of Public Policy and Administration at the University of Delaware. And my question was to you,
Just
Jack.
to say your name again.
Okay,
so
I'm Margie
everybody-
Graves. I'm the director of the Biden School of Public Policy and Administration at the University of Delaware. My question was to you, Jack. You mentioned that schools need to be larger, and as we've grown our school, we now have 9 graduate programs and 3 undergraduate. I'm beginning to think that now we're past growing the school, but rather what we need to do is to engage in partnerships. We're starting a PhD program in engineering and public policy, for example. Do you consider the joining of partnerships with other programs part of the growth of the school, or do you have something else in mind?
Okay, very good. I'll just quickly answer that, and then we'll get to the other question. Absolutely. Partnerships are hugely important. I made that reference because if you look at the NASPA membership, it's very skewed and has long tail. You know, it has over 300 members. But the vast majority of those are small schools. It's only, Laurel, I don't know how many, 50 maybe, that are on a scale that, and that's what I was referring to. And I'd like to see it be 100 or 150 of that scale if we're going to have that kind of impact. But partnerships are key. We're, like I mentioned, we're building a partnership in data science with engineering. We're building a partnership with the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences around environmental studies and environmental policy, right? We're looking at the Political Science International Relations Group as a partner for developing international public policy and international security policy, joint degree programs and research programs. So I strongly support that and think that is a hugely, and it's part of our, integral to our strategy, and I'm glad to hear that you're doing that as well. So thank you for that. This is a tough question. Because the thing is, you know, the progressive era developed a movement that was a coalition of a whole lot of interests, and it came together, and it did include the media, and there were some key journalists, right, exposing bad, harmful practices in businesses and environment and so on. But do we have that? Can we create that? Can we identify people? I'm going to turn to our panel.
I'm going to turn to you.
I don't have a really good response. I think rather than identify individuals, I mean, if you look at the conditions under which these things happen, I wonder whether a crisis actually results in people thinking about what would it really take for us to address these issues versus just sort of trying to do our own little thing in our own polarized way. So, if you look at the two examples that Jack gave, they both arose out of situations that those reforms happened when there was a crisis. So in that sense, that might be, I don't know if it's sufficient, it's certainly potentially a necessary condition.
One of the things that I'm hoping that the Napa Grand Challenges, in partnership with NASPA, ASPA, Volcker Alliance, and others, we need to have a media and partnership and strategy around this. I think this is essential to our success. And it's not easy to do. I remember with NASPA when we were trying to get a campaign around getting the best and brightest into government and trying to get political leaders to support that. It was a tough haul, but I clearly feel that we need to have those kinds of ideas in mind that relate to these challenges, and we do need to partner with the news media and other outside groups that we can leverage to be, including foundations.
So I think the challenge is not in getting agreement around the challenges. I think you'll see broad agreement around the challenges. It's about the how and the execution of it, where you're going to see differences of opinion. So I think, and addressing those differences of opinion, and that was to my point about figuring out what's the right strategy. There's no one right strategy. And so I think there would be broad agreement around the challenges. I think it's about the execution of those.
And I just wanted to say one final thing. I was so impressed, 2,000 scientists, $18 billion overseeing, I think if you ask the populace, does the USDA have this kind of science, they wouldn't know that at all. And so part of, I feel, that message is to get out there about the amazing things that government is doing, the amazing quality from scientists to others that are impacting our society in a positive way every single day. Please thank our panelists for this discussion.
Thank you, Jack. And it's nice to meet you.
Yeah, very nice to meet you as well. Thank you.
What a great way to kick this off. Don't go anywhere. I have a really important announcement, okay? What a great way to kick this off. I want you to remember all three of those panelists are new fellows about to be inducted this afternoon. So think about the talent we're already adding to this group. We are making a very short notice schedule change. If you were planning to attend the session on restoring the partnership and mutual accountability at 2 o'clock, that panel is going to meet at 10 o'clock in the Potomac Room. And if you were planning to attend the long-term fiscal outlook and its implications for the nation's future at 10 o'clock in the Potomac Room, That panel will meet at 2 o'clock in the conference theater. So remember your little yellow sheet about the room changes, and please note that short notice swap. Be back here at noon. Go.